Zardoz speaks to you, his chosen ones. Trashy paperbacks are good. The penis is evil. Zardoz, your god, gives you the gift of second-hand paperbacks. Now go forth and read.
Wow. Praise be. Oh yes, they did. They actually did novelise Zardoz. I can't imagine many of you will be unfamiliar with this film, but if you should be new to Zardoz, it was a 1974 science fiction film made by John Boorman, who was on the rebound from an aborted take on Lord of the Rings. The film got some positive reception on its release for its visual sumptuousness and a whole lot more flack for its self-indulgence and its incomprehensible batshit level craziness. Naturally, it's attained a unique sort of status as a midnight movie for people who are out of their minds on drugs, and this reputation has steadily grown over the years. Now, I had my first encounter with Zardoz in my late teens when it popped up. It popped up on the very late Friday night after the pub TV slot. I'd have stumbled in after a night on the Lager and Blacks, and I'd have flicked on the telly, and I'd have been confronted with this kind of mangle of dystopian science fiction dementedness, and I was fine with that. I thought Zardoz was great. I didn't have a lot of idea of what I was supposed to make of it, but I was probably out of my mind somewhat, and this film included guns, loads of nudity, incredible visuals. It had this sort of Celtic bastardisation of the Easter Island head, and it floated. And it had James Bond in this ludicrous kind of jockstrap and pirate boots, stomping around pillaging the place. So yes, it was pretty acceptable post-pub entertainment as far as I was concerned, and when you're not setting your standards too highly. Little did I realise, though, that they'd actually novelised this thing. Pan Books, proper publishing company, 1974, by John Boorman himself, with some input from Bill Stair. Maybe John felt that he needed to explain this thing, and to that end there's a preface. I wrote Zardoz in 1972 at my home, a lost valley in the dreaming hills of Wicklow. It came out closer to a novel than a screenplay. Gradually I worked it into a film form that proved too radical for most of the studios. Finally, I got some backing and shot the movie in our local studio, Ardmore, and locations around my house between May and July 1973. In the final weeks of preparation, Bill Stair, who worked with me on Point Blank and Leo the Lost, came in to help rationalise the visions that threatened to engulf me. While editing the film, I decided to restore the story to novel form. I asked Stair to help me with it. It follows the film very closely, but draws heavily on the earlier versions. It offers an interpretation of the film and helps to lay those ghosts that stalk the Celtic twilight, pressing this strange vision of the future upon me. And you do get a little more embellishment with this. For a start, we go in from main character Zed's boyhood, where we learn that he and his father are fortunate. They are the blessed ones. They have the right to slay and breed, and to be one with Zardoz. And we find them awaiting Zed's initial childhood encounter with Zardoz, in which we get the classic spiel from this mysterious floating idol. The gun is good, the penis is evil. Before the vomiting of the guns and Junior Zed bagging his very first revolver. We witness as Zed grows up that he sees evidence of previous civilisations alongside a mutant life and, of course, the Brutals. Zed becomes a superior warrior intellect, gleefully killing and raping in the name of Zardoz. We also get an explanation of this fabled garment of Zed's. These were the days before anyone had conceived of a mankini. In fact, this is, and I have this down as currently the funniest word in the English language, this garment is a breechclout. Remember where you heard that first. Zed perceives the ways of Zardoz to slowly change as he grows. There's a slow shift in emphasis from the eradication of the brutals towards the exploitation of them for the purpose of raising grain crops. Slowly Zed's dedication becomes replaced by doubt, which is followed by an inexplicable curiosity, which leads him to surface from concealment within a pile of grain within his god's head, where he's confronted by placental sacs containing comatose humans and a smilingly mocking figure leaning on one of the god's teeth, who Zed wastes little time in putting a bullet into. Watches the mysterious adversary spinning away into the void, admonishing Zed as he goes, in the manner of a spurned music business manager, "I could have showed you. Without me, you're nothing." Zed's journey continues, the stone head touching down in a cloistered location known as the Vortex. This is completely alien to Zed, who, so far unobserved, explores his environment to witness evidence of a technologically developed elite type of society who are advanced in science and horticultural techniques, but yet they require their members to maintain some sort of truck with manual labour still. Zed has a few hours grace to examine this society's unfamiliar environment and strange gadgetry. There's some sort of computer-like ring device which can project historical data, and it torments Zed by bombarding him with disembodied salutations from the mysterious man that he's just killed on his journey. Struggling to process what he's confronted with, Zed then encounters an ethereal lady upon a white horse, but this mirage evaporates, and then he's up against Consuela, a scantily dressed ambassador for this strange society whose mind control techniques are far superior to any physical threat that Zed might represent. While he's preoccupied with staring at her boobs, she zaps him with her mental stun gun rays, and Zed is under. Zed is the first specimen of outside life that these Eternals have encountered in many years. The overseeing of their outside world has been entrusted to Zed's victim, Arthur Frayne, whose death is only temporary as this society has the means to regenerate, so nobody slips through. Frayne's probity in this area is now under some question. Zed's scientific value has to be balanced against his dangerousness to their society. Consuela is all for having him swiftly dispatched, but her colleague May, there's clearly some history between these two, and a resultant tension, argues clemency on scientific grounds, and Zed is granted a 3-week stay of execution. Between these examinations, Zed is entrusted to the care of Friend, who's clearly something of a rebellious spirit within this community, and seems to regard Zed with some sort of affection, though he treats him pretty much as a cart horse. Traversing the compound, Friend first introduces Zed to his own chaotic cultural archive, which includes books which it's hinted are something that Zed may have seen before. He then takes him on a grand tour where Zed witnesses what happens to those who choose to transgress, to protest too much. They're punished with months or years onto their lives within this artificially youthful community, and have collectively been consigned to a demented kind of fogies compound where they're known as the Renegades. There's also a separate home for the Apathetics, whose bloodless existence within the Vortex has resulted in a state of absolute comatose passivity, a condition that's on the rise within the Eternals. The Exterminator realises that Zardoz has served as a floating grain silo to serve this community, but he's not slow, and jarred by his survivor's instinct, he begins to piece together a picture of how this society functions, and more importantly, their petty intrigues and squabbles, and from there, their vulnerabilities. Zed is subjected to further examination, including the notorious Boncon experiment, in which, before the committee, he's exposed to a broad spectrum of pornographic material, but Zed is learning what not to reveal, and chooses not to allow his bodily reactions to kick in until he's visibly focused not on these images, but on a visibly embarrassed Consuela. Immortality and the sterility of their existence has all but eradicated the eternal sex drive. At the evening meal, Friend falls foul of Consuela, who's irritated by his mischievous cultivation of this new savage, and he's summarily banished to join the renegades, an event which traumatises Zed and causes him to flee. At the outer limit of the compound, Zed runs bang into the invisible periphery field, and while he realises that some of his former exterminator companions are within view on the other side, they're in no position to help him, so he heads for cover. Stumbling into the Renegade's compound, where a now superannuated Friend recognises him, Zed's at first greeted with hostility, but figuring these decrepit inmates all share a yearning for death, Zed rallies them to his cause. Zed has a hunch that his one-time champion May might have the secret to the conquest of this suffocating immortality, and he seeks her out. May employs her weirdy mind powers to send Zed off into a memorial odyssey, regressing back through various past events to the moment at which, with the aid of 3 accomplices in his quest for truth, he embarks on his stowaway mission into the Stone Head. The revelation emerges that firstly, Frayne was Zardoz all along, and that the name was derived from a bastardisation of the title of L. Frank Baum's Wizard of Oz. This has all been Arthur Frayne's method that he's developed within the autonomy that he's been allowed of controlling the Outlands. Fearful, gullible people had been cowed by shabby and extraordinary tricks. In awe, they had worked for a charlatan, a jackanape in God's clothing. He had bullied them and in exchange given them cheap advice dressed as religion. They could not progress to wisdom, to a freedom and a better understanding of the world. They would always live in the darkness of fear, ignorance and exploitation. Emotional and exhausted at the culmination of these revelations, Zed falls into May's lap, and reconnected with feelings long atrophied, it starts to get a little bit physical between them. However, Consuela shows up and spoils the party. It gets confrontational, and Zed's physical rage seems to almost equal Consuela's psychic armoury before the moment is diffused by the reappearance of the lady with the white horse, Avalo, who provokes an unfamiliar feeling of tenderness within Zed and informs him that he is to be their liberator, before revealing further about the purpose of the Vortex, which was originally a repository for the remnants of a fallen civilization. However, Consuela is now in pursuit with a posse in tow, and they corner Zed within Frayne's experimental polythene greenhouse. He breaks loose and runs the gauntlet of apathetics who've come to realise that they can reinvigorate themselves by licking his sweat. Before holding up with the renegades, who conceal him from Consuela's lynch mob by dressing him up as Death's bride, another memorable image from the film, and performing a ritual marriage with Friend. This leads to another kind of regression therapy session which gets rather trippy, and in which Zed is required to inseminate everybody in exchange for ultimate knowledge of the Vortex and the tabernacle which serves as its nervous system. What follows is a pretty spacey kind of headfuck, in which the original purpose of this setup is revealed to Zed. The technology which we've seen was conceived to enable interplanetary travel, so this little enclave might transcend the holocaust that's befallen their planet by preserving their accumulated knowledge and populating other worlds. Zed's community had effectively been the DNA pool, the brutality of their existence having isolated the hardiest of the genes. But Zed perceives that this technological Noah's Ark has become a prison, an intrinsically flawed system that's an offence against nature, and that has somehow recognised itself as such, and unable to self-destruct on its own mission, it's somehow generated Zed to perform the task of putting this unnatural experiment to an end. In doing so, he must confront and transcend his former self. As this process of realisation is underway, Consuela and her heavies break into Friend's archives and embark on an orgy of destruction on the assembled cultural relics there. But when the crunch comes and Consuela confronts a passive Zed, she is unable to deliver the death blow. The hunt is always better than the kill, and instead professes love for Zed, who succeeds in penetrating the tabernacle and tripping the self-destruct mechanism. As the Vortex's various systems falter, the protective shield around the border comes down, and Zed's former brethren deliver a welcome death to the renegades and various other inhabitants. May leads a small posse away in the opposite direction to establish a new natural community, while Zed and Consuela take refuge in Zardoz's now crashed head, which has fallen in dense woodland so they're safe from the marauders. There they establish a home, conceive a son who grows up and heads out into the wider world, leaving Zed and Consuela to grow old and to die together. There it ends. Okay, this book probably won't overturn Zardoz's standing as an incomprehensible slab of cinematic lunacy and a late-night indulgence for people who are out of their minds. But it does reveal a little more of Boorman's reasoning and intentions, and it indicates that there was at least some method behind the madness, however obscured that might have become in the transference to celluloid. Critics have always tended to home in on this film's apparent incomprehensibility. I'd imagine before reading this that Zardoz might have been an attempt to question what kind of society we'd aspire to live in. Maybe the illusory techniques of misrule, hence the Wizard of Oz reference, or maybe a comment on the nature of savagery in the world, rather than being a Darwinian expression of raw nature, being something that's cultivated by a remote, manipulative elite group. I mean, this does reveal a little more of Boorman's thinking. There's an interesting video by S.F. Debris which points out that the director had been deep into the works of Aldous Huxley at the time. But for all that, this film will continue to enjoy its midnight movie cachet and to be loved and hated on that level. And to me, if this counts as one of Boorman's monumental follies, well, I think he's welcome to make them. Boorman gave us Deliverance and he gave us Excalibur, which are up there with my favourite films ever, so I can't ever grudge him the right to go off the rails occasionally and get into some batshit, breech-clout wearing, bad acid science fiction.
Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Zardoz has spoken.